Hey everyone, I'm in Busan, South Korea right now, and I thought this would be a great opportunity standing here in front of the Busan station to talk about the differences between big cities in Korea and small towns, and what the differences are when it comes to living in Korea. And this is especially important if you're thinking of coming to teach English in Korea and you may want to go to a big city, but you may get a position offered in a small town and you want to know the differences. Is it worth it? Is it not? And how your life will vary if you do live in one of these small towns versus a big city. Okay, let me jump straight in by saying that there are a lot of big cities in Korea and a lot of them are very similar in a lot of ways. So first up, there's of course Seoul, and everyone knows that, and that's definitely a lot bigger than most of the other cities by a long way. So typically there's Seoul, and then there's a lot of other cities which are big in themselves, but they're not quite as big. And I found that Seoul is kind of its own ecosystem that's a little bit different, but the other big cities are quite similar in a lot of ways, to the point that if you were in a downtown area in one of these cities and I kind of picked you up and dropped you off in another one, you might not even be able to tell the difference unless you know them fairly well. So the other big cities, and these are all over 1 million, typically around 3 million, even more, are Daegu, Busan, Gwangju, Inchcon, and there's a few others which some of them are a little bit smaller too, but these are all pretty big cities, and if you live there, you're going to get a great experience, including a bunch of different things that are common between them. So some of the similarities are they're all going to have a big downtown area or multiple downtown areas. There's going to be shopping as well as lots of entertainment. There'll be cool things like cat cafes and lots of noraebangs, karaoke rooms. And typically being in these big cities, people speak better English. There'll be lots of young people who are kind of cool. There'll be a cool younger scene, very open compared to smaller cities and small towns. Some of the other things that a big city might have that small towns won't is a subway system. There'll be really good transport, public transport in and out of the cities. Typically there'll be a train station that takes you from one city to another. Okay, so how does this compare to the small towns in Korea? Well, the small towns, for one, are going to be a lot smaller, obviously, less people. There'll be less foreigners there. So, for example, I went to a friend's small city and she had only 4 foreigners in that town, and they play a lot of board games. And a lot of the time you'll only be able to get to these small towns with a bus. So there'll be a bus in and out of the town, whereas, you know, the bigger cities will have trains. There will probably be not as much to do in terms of restaurants, coffee shops, maybe a few of them, and, you know, not that much entertainment. There'll be less English spoken, and overall you're going to have just a smaller town experience. However, it is very modern in the sense that you're still going to have really good taxi services everywhere. Korea is great with that. You're going to have high-speed internet still, and a lot of people get worried when they hear rural, because that's how Epic classifies it, as, you know, in the city, in a metropolitan area, or rural. And I think a lot of people think it's kind of slummy and bad, but in my experience, even the small towns in Korea have all the basic amenities you need. There's, you know, hospitals, doctors, and basically if you walked into this rural area, it wouldn't be at all what you expect, because it's just kind of like a less exciting version of the city. So I'd say when you're deciding between a small town and a big city, you should ask yourself what kind of lifestyle you prefer. If you like the big city life, then any of the cities that I've mentioned can be a great experience, especially if you like nightlife and lots of shopping and a more busy, almost chaotic experience. Whereas if you like the more small town vibe or slower pace, then going to live in one of the small towns would be really great. And you will typically spend less money when you're out in the countryside, and that's quite nice. If you're planning to save a lot of money, I would suggest going to live out there. There's less to distract you and go to go and spend lots of money on, you know, entertainment and stuff like that. One of the nice things that if you do live in a small town is that it's typically not that hard to get to a big city. Almost all the smaller areas you can get to one of the major cities within an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours max, although I've never even heard of anyone that lives that far away from a city. So typically you can get to a city on the weekend and then have like a nice, normal, relaxed lifestyle during the week, if that's something you want to do. And there's actually a third possibility when you live in Korea, and that's living in a small city. And this is actually where I live, in Inchcon, which is a small city in comparison to the bigger cities. It's only 150,000 people, whereas the other big cities are 1 million plus people. And you might not think that's considered a city, but in Korea there are lots of small cities. So actually there's a good chance that if you're not in one of the bigger cities, you might be in a small city or medium-sized city. And they vary all the way from, I think Inchcon is one of the smallest, you get maybe 100,000 all the way up to 1 million. And these are scattered throughout the country. It's a really populated country. So in between all the big cities, there'll be these smaller cities. And you know, it's not that bad. I quite like it in the sense that it's got a lot of the things that you will need that a big city has. It has like a cinema, it's got, you know, lots of restaurants and stuff like that. The downside is it's not quite as like cool as a big city, in the sense there aren't as many bars and cool restaurants, and you know, it's just not as like trendy. The young people aren't quite as open as in the big cities, I've found. And you know, it's a bit of a trade-off, because you can live in a nice area and you know, I don't spend too much money most of the time, but then I can go to the big city in like 45 minutes on the train, and I live right by the train station. So those are the kind of different options there are in Korea: small town, small city, or big city. And of course there's a lot of demand for Seoul, and a lot of people want to teach there, but sometimes it is very difficult to get jobs there. So it's also good, if you do want to be in a big city, to look into Daegu or Busan, Inchcon, or another one of the big cities, and you'll get a lot of the same experience that you do in Seoul. But you know, it may be easier to find a job doing that. And then in small towns you might quite easily be able to find a job, because not a lot of people sometimes want to go to small towns, but they can be great jobs. And I think the quality of life throughout Korea, no matter where you are, is really good. So I would base my choice on whether you'd prefer to be in a more busy city-like environment or in a smaller town with a slow pace of life. And don't worry that it's going to be rural, because it typically isn't like that. So have a great day. Hope you found that useful. Subscribe to my channel and let me know if you have any questions about teaching English in Korea, and I'll get back to you on that. So I'll speak to you soon. Bye.